Good evening, and welcome to another episode of The Fire Caves, a Star Trek Deep Space Nine podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Perry.
And I'm your host, David. Tonight we're talking about Season 6, Episode 21, The Reckoning. Before we continue, you can find us on Facebook, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube as The Fire Caves, a Star Trek Deep Space Nine podcast.
That is correct. And as I say every single week, you should find us and follow us because we're a pretty good time. And I think that we're doing a great job making our way through this show. I will say, first and foremost, though, I do apologize for last week. We weren't able to bring an episode to you. Mainly just technical issues with Paramount Plus, which stopped us from being able, well, stopped me from being able to access the episode for almost a week. So even though I feel like anyway, I have a pretty good memory, and I probably could have still recalled this episode and maybe muddled my way through it. Knowing the significance of this episode, I really didn't want to do that. I wanted to make sure that I had the opportunity to watch it to be able to talk about it fully with everybody. So, once again, I apologize, but here we are. Um, Also, still battling it out when it comes to the infamous algorithm that releases everything on the various podcasting platforms. Apparently, now our episodes are coming out in like odd bunches of three. I know that basically all of season six is like just kind of all over the place. So I'm trying to figure out how to get everything, back to its streamlined version and also to where everything is caught up. But unfortunately, that means that if you are just following along on with the podcast, you've probably missed a couple. So you might want to just take a second, access our episode listing, and then just kind of like go back a little bit and just make sure that you've got all of them. I mean, if you are following along at all, you've probably already noticed that because you might see an episode or might hear an episode and be like, wait a second, I feel like they've skipped. Go back and check. It's there. I promise it's there. It's just for some reason it's just not letting everything come through the way it's supposed to. And I don't know what is really wrong with it. So I'm just trying. I keep putting the stuff out, just making sure that it is supposedly available. Hopefully we can get this caught up so that by the time we start season seven, all of season six will be out and available, and we won't have any issues moving forward into the final season. So that's that. Now, before we jump into tonight's episode, The Reckoning, we do like to do our weekly check in. And since we are a week off, hopefully, in theory, we got a little bit more to tell you. So take it away, David. How have your last 2 weeks been?
Uh, okay. Work's been work. It's slow right now, right before Christmas. Hopefully things will pick up. We'll see how that goes. But in terms of book reading, read in the last 2 weeks. I've been able to get through two small books. One of them is a book on Governor Morris, if I'm saying his name right. He was one of the founding fathers. He's the one who put the language and pen to paper for the Constitution. So, we the people, that's him. He's the guy who wrote that language, and the book talks about how he did a great job of simplifying a lot of the complicated kind of legalese in order to make things clearer. But he was a fascinating character in his own right. He was a part of the original. Um, he was a part of the Continental Congress that was in charge of the states during the Revolutionary War for a time, and then came back to help write the Constitution, and then was in France for the French Revolution, in part as an American ambassador to France after Thomas Jefferson. And yeah, as people know who listen to the show, and I like to read about American history, and so that's a book it's been on my shelf for a little bit. Glad to read that one. It was a relatively short book compared to some of the other biographies I have. Ron Chernow's biographies of Hamilton and Washington are like 700 plus pages. I mean, those things are huge. This one was like 200. And then I also read a quick little book this past week called Pegasus Bridge. It is about the D-Day invasion. There was a British. They weren't paratroopers exactly. They came in on planes that were gliders. They had no ways of propelling themselves. They were pulled by other planes, but once they detached from those planes, they were gliders. They would glide to the ground, and they were able to be more quiet and effective at getting a group of men to the ground in order to accomplish some sort of task. And a group of British, I'll call them paratroopers, so I think that's not quite the right word. They took a bridge on the easternmost edge of the Normandy invasion to hold off the Nazi panzer tank regiments from sweeping in and destroying the Normandy invasion. It wasn't the most fun book because it turns out the Nazis at that point were kind of incompetent, frankly, on some level. Not
Okay.
the fault of their own. It turns out that at that point in the war, Hitler wouldn't allow anyone to make any other decisions, and so these tanks were ready to go. And if they had been allowed by Hitler, who was still asleep when Normandy started, the D-Day invasion started, if they had woken him up and said, "Hey, we need you to give permission for us to go attack," maybe things would have been different. But because they didn't attack, basically these guys they fly in, they capture this really essential bridge, and there's some fighting, but it's kind of low key action. It's not the most intense and exciting action. But what's interesting about the book is it's written by Stephen E. Ambrose, who wrote the Band of Brothers book. And this book he wrote before Band of Brothers. It kind of got him into that style of writing. And so it's kind of a prequel in a sense to the Band of Brothers book. So it was fine. It was a fun little book, but not nearly as exciting as Band of Brothers. Um, so yeah, I read those two things. I finished reading also the 33 Strategies of War, which is a reread for me. It's the same guy who wrote the 48 Laws of Power, which I've mentioned a couple times. Similar concept of like how do you use mental techniques and psychology to kind of manipulate your way through life, which is kind of just a fun way to think about things. It uses a lot of history to use as examples, and some of that actually being. It at one point it did reference Hitler and the fact that he failed to realize the Normandy invasion was happening. The part of the reason we were successful at D-Day was because Hitler thought we were going to actually land everyone somewhere else, and he refused to believe all the intelligence otherwise. It turned out to be a military intelligence coup on Hitler uh, because they played a bunch of mind games to convince him that Normandy was not the place. But anyway, fun stuff. Just kind of reading some things while business has been slow. And then Christmas is around the corner. Got some Christmas gifts for my nieces today. Looking forward to spending some time with them.
Hmm.
Yeah. How about you? What's up with you?
Pretty much the same stuff. Actually, work has been really, really slow right now as we've been winding through to closer and closer to the holidays and stuff. I think that's going to be just kind of true for everybody right now. That plus with the major, freeze that went through the Northeast, also halted things for us a bit because my job really does rely a lot on commercial auto businesses happening, and when roads get iced over and stuff like that, typically auto businesses tend to shutter their doors for a bit. So yeah, can make for slow going. I have not been doing any heavy reading per se, but I have been doing more writing. So I am really excited about that, that I was able
Fun.
to kind of get back into that. And now that I've had this slower time at work, it's actually given me the opportunity to do more of that. So I'm hoping that I can further along a couple of ideas. Feel like I've been nursing these ideas for, year or two now.
Hmm.
So I'm really hoping to really move forward and hopefully complete a couple of things here really soon.
Nice.
Um, yeah, and that's always the weirdest part for me is like, getting to completion of the written idea, because it's like it feels like I always come up with something else that could have been added somewhere else, or I don't like this part, so let's go back and rehash and refocus here and there. And so now I've just really been on this kick of no, you've already written that, just move forward, like finish it, finish the part, and then we can work on drafts later, right?
Hmm.
um Still doing the workouts and stuff like that, so that's no no real issue there, although here in Texas we did have our most recent cold snap, I'll call it, where the weather got down to early morning. It was like the 30s, I think, one day.
Yep.
And
Mhm.
I went to the gym, and my workouts, I split them up so that half of it's indoors and half of it's outdoors. Now, this normally isn't a problem for here, but man, on this particular day, it was a major problem. And I normally go in, I got a full sweatsuit and a hoodie and everything else that I wear. And at one point during my workout, I guess I had moved in a certain way, and I knocked uh, the hood part off. And David, I don't think of myself as a weak man, but when that cold wind whipped around my sweaty face and neck and everything, I was like, you know what? I might have made a vital mistake in doing outside today. 'Cause it just, like, it felt like it was, like, cutting me all in here in my neck and everything. And so,
Mhm.
so that was just fun to be like, "And okay, I'm done. We're gonna go back inside and, do that."
Nice.
I've been, moving things around more. I feel like I haven't stopped moving stuff. I've got my, bookshelf here, so now I'm, like, digging out the books and arranging and putting stuff onto the shelves and everything else. And I'm really trying to like work on just the layout of my whole place and kind of not really sure what vibe I'm going for. It's like this weird, like half of it dedicated to sci-fi fantasy stuff. The other half is like weightlifting and workout gear. So, whatever. But we'll see. Other than that, I also have finally gotten myself caught up on Lower Decks, which I plan to talk about a little bit towards the end of our show tonight. So stay tuned for that because we are in the final season of that show, and some major news on the new Star Trek movie that we'll also talk about later on.
Yeah,
So,
I quickly, I just want to say, I forgot to mention that I'm caught up on Silo, though actually the most recent episode that came out just a few days ago, not caught up on that one. But so far, enjoying season two. But the thing I really have been enjoying, I don't know if you've heard of this, Perry, or if you're interested in it, but there's a little anthology show on Amazon Prime that just dropped the first batch of episodes called Secret Level. It takes about a 10 to 15-minute story from a video game of all sorts, Warhammer 40,000, Armored Core. They did a D&D episode. Pac-Man has one. Pac-Man. There's a new Pac-Man game coming out, which has got a horror
mhm.
angle, and so this episode is based on this Pac-Man horror angle storyline, which I didn't really care for that episode, but it's interesting. I saw an ad for the game that's actually coming out that this is based on. I was like, oh, okay, well, actually, they have it based on something. But these little 10 to 15-minute shorts are, I think, pretty good. One of them has Arnold Schwarzenegger voicing a pretty hilarious character in a short little, again, they're all short little episodes, but
Hmm.
um, yeah, that's the only other thing I really watched this week other than Silo. So
Well, speaking of shows on Amazon, there is, Amazon has, really kind of expounded on the Lord of the Rings with that whole, what was it called?
Rings of Power.
Rings of Power. I was going to call it the Golden Rings for some reason. But anyway, they've got another thing that they're doing. This one's animated, and I believe it's called the War of the Rohirrim or the Battle
Hmm.
of the Rohirrim.
War.
It's animated. It's animated. It's set about 150 years before the events of Lord of the Rings and the infamous, hold at Helm's Deep and so forth. So if you have any interest at all in watching that, that's available. I was considering checking it out because from what I understand, Peter Jackson is back and he's the one who's kind of helmed the direction of that. And I'm just interested to see what he's done there. Also, they have finished the final filming of the next season of Witcher with the new Witcher. The guy who is replacing Henry
Liam.
Cavill is
Liam.
Liam Hemsworth.
Yeah.
Not He's Chris Hemsworth's brother.
Right. The
So,
younger one. Yeah.
yeah. So they've released some images from that. They have not released the season yet, but they have released some images from it. And I don't want to knock the guy, but I'll just he's no Henry Cavill. I,
He's
there's
not.
no other way.
He's tall
There's
and
no other
thin.
way.
Where Henry
Yeah,
Cavill, I mean, the one problem he had as Superman is he didn't have quite the height for it, but otherwise he looked great.
yeah,
Um,
yeah. So he's. it's obvious. I read some comments on a couple of the pictures, and one of them really stands out to me. It said, "It looks like somebody went and raided the Game of Thrones set and took all of the wigs from Daenerys and put them on old boy for the role of Geralt."
uh,
So I was like, oh, you know what? I mean, it's obvious they're going for a very stylistic difference here while trying to continue the storyline. Also, I know that there's a new Witcher game that's coming out, which is supposed to be focused on the character Ciri, I believe is how you pronounce her name, and that's already gotten some negative feedback. So I guess long-standing fans of the Witcher series have been following along with Geralt for a long time, and now all of a sudden the fourth game is coming out, and apparently it's going to have nothing to do with him. So they're not too happy. Which I get it when you want to take your stories into a different direction, but there is something to be said about the fact that you've done something for so long, and then without a real explanation, you're making this kind of switch. I feel like that's the problem that the Halo, franchise went through as well. You've got a very well established, well liked character in Geralt, in Master Chief, so forth and so on. And when you give very little focus or no focus at all to those characters into something new without a real explanation, it's gonna fall flat. So I don't know. I've never played the Witcher game, so I don't know how all that translates out. I just know, again, the character building. So who knows? All I can say is maybe you just give it a shot and know it through the game. It will give an explanation. There's
yeah,
that.
I don't know anything much about it. I have heard that it's coming out, but yeah, maybe like that's what side games, side stories are supposed to be about.
Yeah.
Just it's not the main story; it's a side story, but it ties in. And I mean, I Halo, was it Reach was one of the
Yeah, I was
spinoffs,
gonna
and I
say
feel like
Halo.
Reach.
Halo did it. Halo did a couple of games that were spin-off games that told different tales in the same universe and featured new characters, introduced different characters.
ODST.
ODST is one that stands out for me. I definitely played that one. Completely new set of characters that did come back later on for Halo 5 and were involved in that as well. So I mean, there are ways to introduce new characters and then get them to tie back into your main storyline. But it just seems like so many places or so many um, franchises, whether they're games, TV shows, whatever, when they want to do the kind of this branching off thing, they don't give enough explanation for it. So it's hard for your long-term fans to really get into it. And this, to me, it seems like it's a colossal mistake on the behalf of whomever is backing these things to not pay attention to your long-term fans because they're the ones that are ultimately going to sustain your product because if you're always aiming for new fans, your flash in the pan new thing, while it may gain their attention for a little bit, it might not be enough to sustain them to turn them into long-term fans.
Right.
But if you already have a built-in fan base, then there's nothing wrong with giving them something while also creating something new, kind of bridging the gap. And I feel like as much as Star Trek has had its issues, I feel like it succeeds in this area in a couple of products like Lower Decks and Strange New World and Prodigy, because obviously the source material is Trek. It still pays enough respect to that in a lot of regards while introducing new characters and fresh concepts. Having, like, for example, an animated show that features more comedy than some of the others, but it doesn't completely depart from storytelling or drama or anything like that. It just injects a lot of comedy into it.
Right.
I think that's why that show has become so popular and why people are surprised that they're ending it after this season, after this current season, the fifth season. So there are ways to do it. I just wish that, The Witcher, um, Superman to a certain degree, Halo, all these would, take the cues and do them right rather than totally subverting all the work that's come years before. So,
Right. Yeah.
and
Have you heard that Chris Evans is going to be back as an evil version of Captain America for one of the new?
I hadn't heard that, but I watched a trailer for the new Captain America with Sam as Captain America, and there was a brief part in the trailer, and it was like the shadowy figure standing there, and I was like, well, I mean, that's obviously Steve Rogers. Like, you couldn't, they didn't even do it well, you know. It's like, well, that's, yeah, that's clearly, you know. So I'm not surprised at all.
Ah,
So
I don't think I've seen
and
that trailer. Interesting.
yeah, yeah, um it was interesting. We can talk about that in a little bit too, because we are not here to talk about those things tonight.
Nope.
In fact, we are here to talk about this near 30-year-old episode of Star Trek, which was an amazing episode. I loved this episode. I loved the allegories that were in this episode. Just so many little notes and points about this one that I really just was like, I'm glad that I fought and struggled to finally sit down and watch it, because I wouldn't have remembered all of those things had I not. So yeah.
Right.
So, would you want to give the recap, or do you want me to do it?
You go ahead and do it. I watched the
Okay,
episode about a week ago, so you're more
okay,
fresh on it. Yeah.
okay. And so I'll try to be rather quick because we are a little bit behind on our time, and I want to make sure we get to it. So this episode starts with all of our main characters in the wardroom. They're discussing the Dominion battle. They're discussing, wins, losses, the effect of the Romulans now having joined the battle thanks to some expert lying that Cisco did some episodes back, and the effect that they're having on the war. Odo points out that even with Romulan success, there's a good possibility that they're probably going to be at war with the Romulans later on, because Romulans don't like to give up territory once they've won it. And everybody's like, yeah, well, we're not, we'll deal with that later. Right now, we're going to take the win for what it is. Everybody has their various assigned duties, and they clear out, leaving Odo and Kira alone in the wardroom, in which we see them in their, kind of an affectionate moment. Again, now having just watched them finally come to grips with their feelings for each other and are officially together. So we're getting to see this very affectionate moment between them. Um, Cisco gets a notification that, or no, he's not notified, but he is told about the underground city of Bahala, which we had learned about all the way back in, I think, season 3, season 4, when Cisco was having those visions, and he ended up finding Bahala back then. Well, they've been doing, the Bajorans on Bajor have been doing excavating ever since then, and they've come to really kind of expand upon the area, and they have found this tablet in a wall that seems to indicate that it's been waiting for the emissary to show up. There's a bunch of other old ancient Bajoran written on it, but they can't translate it. So Cisco says, "Well, I can," and he takes it to the station for Dax to translate. Really, not him, but Dax to translate, and sets her the task of translating this. What did they say? It was like, 50 to 30,000-year-old tablet or something just crazy,
Hmm.
old, really old tablet.
Hmm.
Sets her to the task of translating it, which she, tries to begin. And this also seems to coincide with the wormhole acting crazy and causing the station to rock and shake and so forth.
Hmm.
Kai Wynn, who we haven't seen in quite some time, pops up, and she's like, "What are you doing? You took
Hmm.
this tablet from our most sacred ancient city, and ever since you took it, crap's been happening on the planet. The wormhole is opening and closing and shaking like crazy. We've got flooding over here. We've got earthquakes over here. We got tornadoes over there. Like, give the tablet back, man. Stop angering the gods." And Cisco's like, "Yeah, no, I don't think this is what you think it is. And it says the emissary on it. I'm the emissary. I'm going to keep this thing, and I'm going to figure it out." Oh, I forgot to say, before that happened, when they were down in the tunnels and they found it, he did have a brief vision from the prophets where they said, "The reckoning has begun," and then he was thrown across the wall. So
Right.
there's that. So now he's really preoccupied with this tablet and trying to figure it out. um Kai Wynn is basically like, kind of hounding him about returning it. She sends an official complaint to Starfleet to get him to send it back. And at which time he's finally like, again, after debating with her a little bit more, he's finally like, okay, fine, we'll send it back. The night before he's supposed to send it back, he goes down into the lab where Dax had been studying it. He gives his little angry speech at the prophets for not being a bit more forthcoming and being all mysterious and stuff. And in anger, he picks up the tablet and smashes it against the wall. And when he smashes it, we see these wisps of blue and red vapor escape from the thing. And now, yeah, after everybody's talking to him, like, how do you feel? Whatever else, he's like, oh, I feel fine now. I'm not angry anymore. I guess I've done what I'm supposed to do. Uh, Convenient, I guess. So, they used what little knowledge Dax had to translate, saying that there was obviously something was going to happen and that the emissary was going to do something else. They just don't know what that is. Um, of course, Kai Wynn is furious that instead of giving back the tablet, he destroyed it. But
Yeah.
there's really nothing else that she can do. They finally get a call to come down to the promenade where they see Kira with this pale blue glow about her standing in the opening of the Bajoran temple with electricity shooting out of her hands. And basically, she's has been inhabited by a prophet.
Mhm.
And the prophet then tells her that, or tells everybody that the reckoning, also known as Kostamojan, has begun, and she is awaiting the vessel of the Parace. Now, the Parace are another group of celestial beings that we had found out about. I think that was season 4,
That sounds about
5,
right.
something like that. And they are basically the antithesis of the prophets. They're the more evil demonic spirit versus the prophets being the more loving benevolent ones.
Mhm.
And so according to the prophecy, there is supposed to be this showdown between the prophets and the power wraiths, and even the prophets don't know who's going to win, but whomever wins this, it's either going to usher in 1,000 years of peace and prosperity and unparalleled wonders for Bajor, or 1,000 years of total terror, hell, everything, the worst of the worst, one way or
The
another.
and the destruction of the station
And the
and
destruction of the station on top of all
yeah,
that, because
yeah,
it is the gateway to the temple, so it's got to be destroyed
right.
or preserved, whichever whoever wins. So, in that moment when the prophets are speaking to them, the prophet tells Cisco that he's done his part, so he can kind of get out of the way. Um, Kai Wynn tries to address the prophet, but they just totally ignore her and go on waiting for the vessel of the Wraith. Cisco evacuates the station, and Dax and Worf and everybody else is like, "Look, we don't have to have this fought here. Deep Space Nine is of pivotal importance to the war effort. We can't afford to have the station lost. So instead of letting them fight out their battle here, we can flood the whole thing with chronoton radiation, which, if we ramp it up slowly, it will give the prophet a chance to leave the body of the inhabited person without being seriously harmed."
Right.
Cisco decides against it. He's putting his faith in the prophets because, as he points out, there was a time when he had asked the prophets for help, and they had granted the help, but they had told him that he would, have to pay them back. There'd be a penance for them
Right.
interfering and helping out. And if you remember, that was at the end of the last season, where when the Jem'Hadar fleet was coming through the wormhole, Cisco intervened and got the prophets to basically
The end
obliterate
of the sixth part
the sixth part arc of season
intro.
6.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, 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 yeah. Sorry, keep going.
So now Cisco's convinced this is that time. This is the penance he must pay for them helping out. And we also find out that apparently since that happened, the Dominion still hasn't been sending troops through the wormhole. They're now afraid of the wormhole aliens and don't want to cross that threshold just yet. So, with that being said, Cisco tells them to hold off on their plan, and then he goes back to the promenade. And when they're trying to do the evacuation, Kai Wynn has convinced some followers to stay. Of course, she has. So now they're just kind of in the way, and he's like, "You can't stay here. It's too dangerous. Leave." They convince the majority of them to go, but Kai Wynn stays, and that's when it's revealed who the Parace vessel is, and it's Jake Sisko, of course. And so now we have a showdown between good prophet Kira and demon Parath Jake. And it's basically a battle of wills, and we see the blue energy and the red energy coming out of them, smashing into the middle. And apparently, it's doing some major damage to the two vessels. We see veins popping out, we got blood from the noses and stuff like that. And it's kind of this weird push and pull back and forth thing. But as the battle continues, we see that seems like the Kira prophet, is winning, a little bit more, and they're going to win. But it's really a test for Cisco because it's possible that winning means that Jake will die. And
Mhm.
so Cisco is saying, he's putting his trust in the prophets. They'll protect him. He's going to keep the faith, basically. He's not going to, interrupt this thing. He's going to let it happen. Unfortunately, unbeknownst to him, Kai Wynn has snuck her way into an evacuated ops and enacts the chronoton radiation, which forces the Palwraith and Prophet out of their respective host vessels, averting Kostamogen. No deciding battle moment here, so the reckoning basically remains unreckoned because of her interference. And now they're kind of up in the air as to what's going to happen next. Kira recovers quickly, bounces back, whereas Jake is still in the infirmary. So it kind of makes you think that Jake was probably going to die. It was taking more of a toll on him. Jake probably would have died.
Right.
Kira escorts Kai Wynn to her ship to leave, and they have a little conversation in which basically Kira is like, "You stopped them not because you cared about Bajor or the station or anything like that. You did it because you were so jealous that a human, a non-Bajoran, had greater faith than you did, and that the prophet showed him more favor than to you. That's why you did it. You did it out of jealousy, not out of concern for the station or his son or whatever. So tell yourself whatever you want, but we all know the truth." And then they depart from there. And she basically says, "Because of you, we don't know what's going to happen next. You know, you're awful, as we already knew."
Yep.
And that's essentially how the episode ends. So lots to unpack here, lots of great moments here, and I can't wait to really get into it. So, but of course, I got to start with the first question, which is always the first question. What did you think of this episode?
Oh man, this episode is it is a bag.
Yeah,
um yeah, so gosh, Kai Wynn making her choice is the most interesting thing that happens.
I'm glad you decided to start with Kai Wynn because there is a lot about her in this episode
Yeah.
that some people were confused about, and they said ultimately didn't fit with her character arc. I feel like it did. I feel like it fit perfectly.
Yeah, if you know where it's been leading, Kai Wynn seems she puts on a good front for someone who might be coming around on like Cisco being the emissary, but
Hmm.
in the end, she is not willing to take risks that she can't take herself. She won't let other people take risks. She won't let other people do things if she's threatened. She doesn't trust the prophets unless she can control them. They are not beings that she trusts. They are beings of power that she is trying to manipulate on her own behalf, and she will do whatever she has to do that. The reason I say this episode is kind of mixed for me is because there are elements of it that make me go kind of just shake my head, but then but then I have to say, okay, I just need to get on board with the storytelling. So, for example, um, the idea that Cisco is the emissary and all he had to do in this episode, which is not all he had to do, but at least initially, was just throw the tablet against a wall. Like, oh, okay. I mean, anyone could have done that. Now, of course, the idea is that like he got to that point because he was frustrated, and that's what caused him to throw it. But another that also I feel like kind of undermines his character a little bit. Like he's the kind of person who loses his temper. I mean, we know he's an emotional guy, but I don't feel like he's the type to destroy stuff in anger. I mean, he might be tempted. I'm not, don't get
So
me wrong. I think Cisco is someone who could be tempted.
so
Um,
I always read that as I always interpreted that scene anyway as he was still being influenced by the prophets. Like, yes, Cisco does have a temper. We know that, but
sure.
we also know he has an unnatural um attraction, I guess, to all things prophet. You
Hmm.
know, the orbs and everything else affect him differently. And since this thing clearly contained some form of energy that only he seemed to be affected by. Like again, when they first touched it and it threw him across the wall, and then in this instance here we see the vapors escaping and everything else. To me, I feel like his attitude in and around that thing was always more intense than when he was away from it. So it was like he was already feeling frustrated when he went into that room at night, and
Right.
the frustration mounted, and then the frustration plus close proximity to this thing, which is giving off a weird kind of demonic energy, whatever, it got the better of him, and he
Yeah.
broke the thing.
That seems to be kind of the indication. I guess what I'm getting at is that it felt cheap for what kind of the importance of the prophets are supposed to be, the emissary. Like the idea that all that Cisco had to do in this episode was just knock it over is just like
You know, if perhaps if they had filmed the scene better, like maybe instead of him, circling the thing, if he had been sitting there holding it, trying to decipher it as he's trying to, really, absorb what it is and read it,
right,
and then out of frustration, kind of slamming it down, that might have
right,
been different versus him just spinning on a dime, grabbing it, and boom,
right. I like, for example, like I like what you're saying, but I like for me, the idea that this is his last night to look at it and he's gone to bed and now he's come up frustrated. Like I'd rather him be sitting there exhausted after like 26 plus hours of being up and like he's studying it and he's exhausted and he like accidentally knocks it and that's what caused it to break. And it's like
Okay.
his faith, his intensity, his willingness to understand was what caused him to be there and caused the accident. Because of course everyone would be cautious around it. Um, I just feel like they went with a quick and cheap route with the way how things happened. Um, I don't know. Uh, and then the battle with Cisco and Kira, I felt was just a little bit of a letdown because it was just two people standing across from each
Oh,
other
between
going
okay. Okay.
Kamehameha and
So
just Kamehameha.
a little Deep Space Nine backstory for you. So when this episode was originally developed, the original battlers were supposed to be Kira and Kai Wynn, and they had intended for this to be more of an actual battle of them hurling bolts of energy and whatever else at each other as they like chased each other around the promenade and various other parts of the station, which is supposed to culminate in this massive battle, which led to the destruction of a large portion of the station. Unfortunately, when they were talking about actually going through that process and staging it and everything else, it almost tripled the length of time it normally takes them to shoot an episode. So keep in
Right,
mind, back then they were on a very tight schedule. Most episodes were shot and finished in about 6 days. They were
right,
saying it was going to take them something like 15 or 16 days to do a full episode and to include the sequence they were
right,
planning on. So they had to scale it back, and then Kai Wynn was substituted out for Jake because they felt like the stakes needed to be a bit higher for Cisco to keep
yeah,
him on the promenade versus going to
yeah,
ops and releasing the chronotons. There had to be a reason why he wouldn't do that. So
right,
they used Jake for it instead. And then, even then, with it being between Kira and Jake, they did plan for it to be a bit more of an involved battle. However, they were having problems with Jake. Sirach often apparently couldn't keep a straight face while trying to do some of these more intense
uh,
scenes. So apparently he just couldn't help it, and they had to do shot after shot, retake after retake because he was laughing so much. Because again, remember, and obviously we know a lot of this stuff is going to be computerized effects that are added in afterwards. So you got a lot of actors just kind of standing and staring
Right.
and pointing and glaring and so forth. And I guess with him and Kira standing where they were standing, it was too funny for him, and
Okay.
he couldn't really do it. So
All
that's why
right.
there's a lot of cuts back and forth, and you don't see a whole lot of it because the boy just could not hold it together. So
That is really funny. I understand the budgetary and time constraints as an explanation. So, okay,
yeah,
fine, we'll pass on that. The other thing that just kind of frustrates me, and I'm saying all the bad stuff up front first, is the prophets. Like, are they truly prophets or are they not? Like, the idea that they can prophesy 1,000 years of glorious, golden age or not, and it'd be up in the air. Part of me feels like that's kind of just cheap storytelling. Like, either the greatest thing ever will happen or the worst thing ever will happen. And here's the moment of glory: two people standing across from each other, pointing beams for extended periods. So it felt like really high stakes. Again, the action, which you explained, felt under didn't have emphasis to it. I'm trying to think of a better word, but you get what I'm saying.
yeah,
So all of that to say that Kai Wynn is the most interesting character in this episode, especially
yeah.
because she does the thing. She doesn't. Kira is totally right. She is a woman who is jealous of the emissary's abilities. Even in this episode, she says, "Well, who am I to disagree with the emissary?" And then goes right along and complains straight to the Federation for what Cisco is doing. She gets what's his name, the president of Bajor,
Shakar,
hard
the
to
prime
give,
minister.
yeah, to give
Which is funny
his
that she's able to get Shakar on board. As Cisco
exactly.
points out, they never agreed on anything, and in fact, she almost had him arrested at one point. That was the whole reason for, like, the mini civil war on Bajor in season what was that, season 2? She was
Yeah,
trying to
3-ish.
arrest
Yeah.
him, and he later
Yeah,
becomes prime minister behind her chasing him down, you know?
exactly. He
So,
takes the prime minister spot from her because she was trying to finagle it for herself.
yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it kind of makes sense that like she's convinced him that all of these terrible events are happening because of the prophet's tablet being taken. But I also find that kind of funny because I feel like Cisco should have more strongly gone against her on that. Something to the effect of, I need to decipher this in order to stop all the earthquakes, as opposed to, I mean, like my name, the emissary, it says welcome emissary on it. Like, if there's anyone who has the right to do anything with it, it's me because my name is
Yeah.
on it.
I do feel like his confrontations with Wynn in this episode, I feel like they were very weak. He did not make a strong enough argument for why he was doing what he was doing. And I mean, you
Right,
could take the stance that he was doing that by, you know, since he didn't truly know that he was causing these things or not, that the removal of the tablet was causing these things or not, by him not saying that he's erring on the side of truth here. But at
right,
the same time, it's like if she's gonna take this kind of leap, you can take one too and be like,
right.
"Yeah, you're claiming that,
Me
this is
taking
all
it,
happening, because I took it, but I've actually spoken with the prophets, and I know that this is something that, you know, I can do."
right,
Like, it says emissary on it. I'm the emissary, so I'm gonna take it,
right.
you know?
Well, and I
So,
feel
yeah,
like this would have been. Oh, go ahead, go ahead, go ahead.
well, no, I'm just saying he didn't play that up very well. I agree with you
Yeah.
there.
Yeah, I feel like he could have been more forceful. And the reason I think he could have been more forceful is because last season we saw him get so passionate about that obelisk that he recreated in the Hollow Suite. And in this one, he just kind of gives it to Dax to figure out. I
Well,
feel
and
like
Dax
he
even says that at one point. She says we can just scan it and I can work off of
right
the
and send
images.
it back.
Right.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
they gave him a couple of outs a few times, and he was kind of weak on taking those.
Right.
But before we get too deep into Cisco, I do want to take a moment and analyze Kai Wynn because she is talked about a couple of times, where people are like her. They feel like her character is not consistent. I feel like she was wholly consistent, and we get some great explanations for Kai Wynn, not from Kai Wynn, that really
Yeah.
explain a lot of her motivations too. So let's keep in mind, like all the way back when we first introduced to this character, this is a person who had some very deep, kind of held to a more ancient tradition of uh, Bajoran beliefs. She was very opposed to outsiders of any kind coming in, especially after the occupation. So she really didn't trust outsiders. She really didn't trust the Federation. She saw them as another potentially occupying force. And then on top of that, here comes this outsider who is named the emissary, more important than even the Kai in the Bajoran religious environment, right?
Right.
So now here's this very ambitious Vedic who, through her own machinations, rises to the office of Kai, but she has to share that power base and that realm of influence with the emissary. The emissary is a person who, like as Kira has pointed out in multiple episodes, he could basically ask the Bajorans to do pretty much anything, and they would have done it. They would have done their best to follow his
Right.
his guidance.
Hmm.
So um, in this episode, Kira explains that she says, "In a way, I feel sorry for Kai Wynn. She had worked all of her life to achieve this level of political power and influence in this title. And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, here comes the emissary, and she's got to share that power and that title of influence with you, an outsider, a seeming, non-believer, a person who has, kind of shied away from their role up until recently, you
Right.
know. So it bothers her that she's had to do all this. Then add that to the fact that we find out in this episode as well that despite how seemingly devout she is, the prophets have never spoken to her. She's never had any kind of experience with them that has illuminated her life in any particular way. So for a lot, in a lot of ways, you could almost think of Kai Wynn as I wouldn't call her an atheist by any stretch of the word, but like she's never seen or had anything that validates her belief in the prophets beyond her just having it. And then once again, you've got these other people all around her who have had various orb experiences. Cisco talks directly to the prophets. He's gone into the celestial temple and seen them numerous times. He's leading all these people. And then, lo and behold, here comes a prophet taking over a vessel, and this is her chance. She walks up to it, kneels down in front of it, asks if there's anything that she can do, and announces herself. She is the Kai of Bajor, basically saying, "You can't ignore me. You're here, and I'm standing in front of you in all my regalia and all of my power and all of my title." And the thing doesn't even look at her. It just turns around and walks back to the door and stands there like she didn't even say anything.
Right.
So it's just like, I ouch, is all I could think, like, ultimate stab in the heart there for
Yeah.
such a devout person, for your the thing of your worship, your God, basically ignoring you on all fronts, and in this
Yeah.
kind of last ditch moment here, still to totally not even acknowledge your existence like that, that's gotta
Yeah.
be awful.
Rough at worst.
Yeah.
Yeah. As you talked, I just thought of, in the Bible when Jesus is talking, the reaction the Pharisees have is very, very much what you're describing. They are the supposedly religious leaders, the ones who are supposed to know everything, who have worked hard, do all the right actions, etc., etc. And yet, when Jesus comes, they're so angry that he interacts with the prostitutes and the tax collectors. I mean, there's sitting and then there's tax collecting. Like they're a whole breed of evil tax collecting. And Jesus says to them that they who were disobedient are now the favored ones, basically, and the ones who thought they were first in line are now cast out, basically. And he basically says it's because you have everything backward. You prioritize the wrong things. You pick the things you think you want for power and self glory, but you miss all the truly important things, and um, that's what causes you to be rejected. And like his whole point is like you just need to change the way you do things, and things will change for you. But I also know that you won't change your ways. Um, So yeah, as you were talking, that's exactly what I was thinking of. Yeah, because Kai Wynn, you're right. Like she seemed on the surface, she has everything right. I mean, even there at the
And
end, as you pointed out, she has a whole group of people praying for the prophet's success. Sorry, you were gonna say something.
no, you're right on that. And then also, we had seen her seemingly have a little bit of a change of heart when it comes to Cisco. She had worked with him a couple of times in the past. She had said that she was going to stop opposing him and follow the path the emissary has laid out for her, and so forth. Even Kira congratulated her on how she had changed her mind a little bit. But then along comes this episode and we see anything but. She's very much throwing up roadblocks and stuff. So you can't even really say that her actions are in her opinion, in greater service to Bajor. That what she does is to protect Bajor. Because even in this, with all the uncertainties of things going on, and Cisco's proven track record of dealing with all things profit related, and him making them result in favorable outcomes, you would have thought that with floods and tornadoes and earthquakes shaking the planet, if he takes the tablet, she should have gone to him and talked to him, sure, but filing any kind of official complaint, absolutely not. Going to Shakar to convince him to send back the tablet, again, not at all. His track record has proven again and again that whatever it is he's doing, at least in regards to the profits, is probably the right thing. But as a person who's never spoken to them, they've never spoken to her. She's never had any kind of interaction. We don't even really know that she's had an orb experience. As far as we know, she hasn't. So, for a person who's been totally devoid of any kind of interaction with these beings that she is also so oddly, deeply devoted to,
Mhm.
um, it just like it really just kind of blows your mind at the way that she just did things that to be a problem.
Yeah, yeah. She I mean, I guess what like when that fight is happening at the end, she she doesn't consider the 1,000 years of
No,
golden age
no, not at all.
worth.
You're absolutely right. She doesn't. I
She
feel like she went and released the chronoton radiation out of pure spite, out of pure pettiness. The prophets have come, and the prophets denied her once again.
well, I want to twinge that just a little bit because she does say after she does it, "May the prophets forgive me or have mercy on me" or something. I think that she thinks she's better than the prophets. That's what it comes down to. The fact that they have any power is just so surprising. Like, how could they have power that they wouldn't recognize her power? She's the Kai. Um, so when she does that, she she it I there's I think this is that weird personality flaw people can have, and I think the Pharisees are an example of this too, of thinking that their devotion is somehow exemplified by their they're confronting and conflicting with and denying the very thing or person they think they're interacting with. Now, to give an example of this, um, it's a weird example, but I'm sure you've heard of the show Shark Tank,
Hmm.
which is about people they go pitch their product and say, well, if you invest in me, whatever. Well, there's an Australian version of that show. I think they call it the Dragon's Lair or something like that. And there's a video I remember seeing of this woman. No, there are two women, but one woman of this partnership uh, is trying to pitch this product, trying to get women into construction, into construction jobs. And so they're asking for investments, and they're getting feedback of like, we don't understand your business model, blah 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 blah, just like negative feedback. And this woman is just saying, no no no, you're wrong, and like she won't take feedback. They say to her directly, like, I see the way you humph and your face is all contorted, like you won't listen to us, you come to us and ask for our help, but everything you do is proof that you don't actually trust us. And anyway, my point is like, that for me, if you could go find that clip, anyone who's listening, again, Dragon's Lair woman. I don't know. Anyway, that's exactly what I think is going on. Is like she thinks she's devoted to the prophets by doing this. The prophets were mistaken. This was a bad idea. The prophets were about to do something totally that they shouldn't do, and I'm gonna take care of this for them.
S-
She is mothering the
s-
prophets,
So in
and
that, I will only say I challenge what your analogy, I guess, because what you're saying in that show, this woman was, if we're going to use it, the woman here in your Dragon's Lair thing
uh-huh,
is Kai Wynn,
right,
and the guys on the dais, the people who are telling her you got to do this or your face is all contoured or whatever, those
right,
guys are basically the prophets.
yes.
Well, that doesn't really work because Kai Wynn's never talked to the prophets. So
No,
it
no, no.
can't even be like they're like the prophets are telling her things that she doesn't want to hear
No, I'm
or
just
did.
talking about the attitude. Like the
Oh,
attitude of Kai Wynn is like this woman where every bit of information that ever since Cisco showed up has confronted anything that she thought she knew, and she refuses to change. She is gonna go to her death with her vision of the world, vision of the prophets, vision of Bejor. She on top of everything, manipulating this and that, and anyone who gets in her way, prophets included, will be challenged. And she doesn't do. I like you said she does it out of spite, like she's angry at the prophets
I
and
feel
she's
like she
mad
does.
at them.
I feel like that this was. Go ahead, say what you're
But
saying.
but
I'll go
but
for mine.
she wouldn't say it that way. You might be right.
No,
My point is that she wouldn't say that she's angry with them. She just she believes that there's something that the prophets didn't know. There
right.
was there was something that Kywin had to do, which when you get down to it, and this is what the biblical references about the Pharisees are also about, is it is a hatred, it is an anger, it is a spitefulness. You're totally right. I
Yeah,
just wanted to kind of
yeah.
dig into that a bit.
Yeah, no, and that's exactly what I wanted because I feel like um you do have to look at this in definitely in that religious context. And for a person like Kai Wynn, who is very proud of the fact that she has dedicated her whole life, her whole being into the service of God, of her religion, right? That everything that she's done in her eyes, every move she's ever made has all been about the better service of to better serve the prophets. She
Hmm.
thought she could be a better Vedic than she thought she was a better Vedic than Belial. She
Hmm.
thought that she would be a better Kai than Belial. She tried to have Belial assassinated because, again, she felt like he was anti whatever it was that she thought the prophets needed
Right.
her to be for her people.
Right.
She partnered up with what was his name, the other first minister that we got rid of.
Yeah, I
She
forget his name
partnered up with
too.
him as well, played by Lou Angela.
Yeah, that was
Um,
season 2, man.
yeah,
Woo!
she partnered up with him, and he was going to fully endorse her as Kai. As soon as he was elected first minister, that was going to be his first order of business, was making sure that she became Kai. And between the two of them, they were going to rule over Bajor and bring usher in this new era for Bajor, all for the greater service of the prophets.
Yep.
And so once again, this person, she we see her when she confronts Kira and says, all of you freedom fighters are the same. You think that you are the ones who single-handedly saved Bajor, but I was in a prison camp. I got daily beatings as well, and all I
Mhm.
had was my faith to protect me while you got your guns and your weapons and you're fighting and whatever else. I just pray. So again, she does feel like she's better than everyone else. She has suffered so much. She's come through all of that. She's risen through all of these different trials, no matter how bad they were, and the trials were self-inflicted or whatever. No matter what, she came through all of that stuff almost you know well, clean in her eyes. No
Right.
dirt on her collar, right? And
Yes.
so once again, I just go back to that kind of devotion and also that kind of maneuvering when she should have been arrested for the assassination attempt. She should have gone to jail for that. She should have gone to jail along with that other first minister that we got rid of in season 2. She
Mhm.
should have lost all of her followers. She should have just so many different times and ways in which we should have seen a downfall of Kai Wynn
Minister Jaro,
and
by the way.
Minister Jaro. Yes, all these times we should have seen her downfall, and
Hmm.
it never happened. She really figures out a way to maneuver it, which is only the best villains can do that. That's kind of the beauty of TV shows and stuff. Like we know they're evil and their evil intent, right? But the fact that in that world that they're in, they've surrounded themselves by these people who, for some reason, continue to give them power and influence. That's how they continue to come back. They're our favorite recurring villains when they pop back up. You're like, I mean, like you
Hmm.
pointed out for me, I love to hate Kai Wynn. It's like every time I see her, I'm like, oh God, this woman, here we go. Like that's it for me. Like, and I
Yeah.
think that's it for a lot of people. But again, even in this, she's so wonderfully consistent with that. And I feel like that moment for her, um, when she's standing there in front of Prophet Kira, as I'm gonna keep calling her. And that's what she says. She doesn't say, "I'm just a humble servant. I'm just a humble Bajoran." She announces herself. I am Kai Wynn,
Hmm.
Vedic of the, or I am Kai Wynn, leader of the spiritual leader of Bajor is what she says. I am Kai Wynn,
Hmm.
the spiritual leader of Bajor. Basically, I am the embodiment of all of the people that believe in you. And here I am.
Right.
How can I serve you? What can I do? And
Yeah.
to not even get a single bit of acknowledgement, even if the thing would, if the prophet had said, "I don't need you," or "I'm not in need of your service," or anything, would have been better than what the prophet did, which was it just turned
Lowered
around.
her.
Like
Yeah.
it didn't even look down at her. It just turned around and walked over to the shrine and stood
Yeah.
there. I mean, it was literally turning its back on her
Right.
in that moment. And so
Right.
that's why I feel like when the time came and everybody was evacuating off of the station, I feel like that's why she went to ops. And her muttering at the end when she releases the chronotons, her muttering, "May the prophets forgive me," is less about truly invoking their forgiveness,
Yes.
and to me more about her kind of bookending her service.
She is
And
trying to cover herself with
yes,
words
exactly. She's
about,
trying. Yes, exactly.
oh, forgive me. I did something I
I
shouldn't have
said the
done.
things. Yeah,
Oops.
kind of the way some people treat apologies.
Yeah.
They say it, but they don't really mean it. It's just something
100%.
that I feel like that's what that was when she said that.
Yeah.
That's why I was like, and I watched this episode again, obviously, in prep for this. But I remembered in watching, and I remember my reaction that I had years ago when I watched it, and I was like, "They're never gonna forgive you. You stopped Ghost Emotion. They're not gonna forgive you."
Yeah.
Um, she just once again just wholly consistent with her, and it's just like Kira said at the end. You were so upset
Hmm.
that Cisco was willing to go all the way,
Even
sacrifice
a
his
loud
son.
Jake. Yeah.
Yes, sacrifice his son for this. You were so upset that he had this kind of relationship with the founders, that his faith was so strong and so unshakable. You were so upset by that that's why you did what you did. Not because you cared about anything else, but because he was that deep in his faith and commitment to the prophets. That's why you did it.
Yeah.
And
I think
yeah,
Kira's only wrong in that Cisco is the twist of the knife. As you said, when she offers herself to the prophet and the prophet just turns
just
around.
turned around.
Like
Just turned around.
so just a fun example of so that 48 laws of power book I mentioned, one of them, I think it's number 11, is keep people dependent on you. I think that's what Kywin wanted. If she had been useful to the prophets, that would have meant the prophets needed her for something and she could have wormed her way in. And they didn't even need that. That's why she did what she did. If she could force the prophets out, if she could force the prophets to do something, then she could prove to herself she had
Well,
power over them. and you're
And let's take that a step further. When you're talking about a person, keeping them needing you, keeping them dependent upon you. Remember, the whole point of Costa was to either usher in 1,000 years of peace and prosperity or 1,000 years of unimaginable suffering, right?
right.
Well, if Cisco brings about the peace and prosperity, not only do the people no longer need a Kai because
Mm,
everything's good for 1,000 years, right? But then who do they attribute that success and peaceful prosperity to?
right.
The outsider, the emissary. The Kai was wholly useless. And
Mhm.
that's the story that gets
She
told.
would be but
Even
a
the
footnote. Yeah.
right. And that's the story that gets told of the infamous day that Kostamojan was decided. The prophets turned their back on the Kai. And yeah, what would you need a Kai for at that point?
Hmm.
As long as we have the emissary and apparently willing vessels like Kira, who is no saint, by the way, she was a freedom fighter. She's murdered people. She's done all these terrible things. Well, you know, if she is so terrible, why did the prophets use her as their vessel?
Right.
Surely they could have used Kai Wynn, our most devoted, most senior spiritual leader, right?
Right.
No, because it's not about necessarily the deeds, but the soul.
Right.
And she was found obviously lacking because they
Right.
didn't use her at all. So
Right.
yeah, and I feel like if you want to take that to that next step, it's beyond just her need to win over Cisco, but to stay needed by the people. And
Yeah.
he was getting ready to eliminate that. And all of these things are working on the various levels for her as to why she needed to stop this thing from happening because she can't have Cisco win. She can't have the people not depending on her. She can't have herself be of bigger note
Right.
in the history of Bajor. So
Yeah.
that's why she did it.
Yeah. Yeah. And as I said when we started talking on this episode, her character is the most interesting one in this episode. Cisco
Yeah.
is second because, of course, he is. They should do more with Cisco. Give me more
Yeah.
Cisco. And the only problem with Cisco in this episode is not that he wasn't interesting, is that it felt like he was like taking a back step when he should be like charging forward a bit more. He's already embraced the emissary role. Okay, now the next role is to tell Kai Wynn to go F off. Like, I'm here and I'm proud to be here.
So this
Anyway,
actually makes for very interesting storytelling coming up because now with this we know that Coast Emojin was not settled.
right,
We know so that means it's something like this has got to happen again somewhere,
right,
right? We know that everybody knows now what Kai Wynn did. So because Kira's talking about it. And so what does that mean for the position of Kai for her? What does that mean when the word gets out to the people on Bajor that she stopped this thing that needed to happen, that she stopped it from happening, that she interfered? Is she still going to be Kai? Is
or
is
is
she
she
going to
gonna
be
be able
Kai
to
in name only?
or is she gonna manipulate it into she took some sort of grand step to
R-
avert disaster,
Right.
which is exactly the type of thing she would say.
Yeah. So I mean, there's a lot of potential pieces here that have fallen out that we need to get answers to, and we are just about at the end of the season, and we only have one left. So, a lot of storytelling to do, and seemingly not enough time to do it. Not to mention, we still have to, resolve that pesky Dominion War that's still
Mm,
out there. So, gosh, there's just so much, and as much as I hate to see that it's ending, I'm so excited because it's such a great story. I'm almost tempted as much as we've been doing this week to week, I almost want to just watch it, let it all run through, because that's something I was never really able to do before because it was week to week on TV, having to remember and so forth and so on. So yeah, just sit back and let the episodes play and put the story together all the way and see if they do a great job that way. But yeah, I think this is a great episode. It's got so many just different complex layers here between the prophets and Cisco and Kai Wynn and the fallout behind all of that. Great episode. Certainly not one that you want to skip or want to miss.
yeah, definitely feels essential. I will say, just part of my kind of mixed bag about this episode is the fact that the this big climactic event didn't happen.
Mhm.
It is averted and it is delayed. This episode feels kind of like a whiplash of like storytelling. Like I'm expecting something big. Oh, nothing happened. Like, oh, okay, now what? Um, Thanks, Kai Wynn.
Right.
uh, so that's why this episode part was kind of a mixed bag for me. I mean, let me put it this way: if this is used in such a way to build a more fantastic climactic finale, like let's say that this event is the reason that the end of this season there's some big battle, and the big battle with the Dominion is simultaneously happening while the prophets are having their redo of this battle, and that's what causes some sort of chain event that changes the events of the battle with the Dominion. That would totally make sense. That would kind of redeem this delayed climactic plot line that didn't happen. Um, so I hope for something like that. But for the moment, I'm just kind of feel like, oh man, we were supposed to have something happen. There were some other things that I felt like I wish had gone a little bit differently. And then so I'm not saying I hate this episode or anything,
No.
but I need this episode to continue to build into more.
Yeah,
So
absolutely. Well, I think those are going to be our final thoughts on the Reckoning here. Again, if you want to watch this or any other Trek episode, you should definitely go over to Paramount Plus, where they all exist, except for Prodigy, of course, which is on Netflix, and you can watch them all at your leisure. If you have issues with the streaming platform, I can speak from personal experience and say go ahead and reach out to their customer service department. They will solve your issue. It may take them a little bit of time, but they will solve your issue. So
hmm,
um, just be aware of that, because I know I had some streaming issues with trying to access this and several other episodes from other Trek shows that I like to keep in my kind of steady relaxation rotation, as I like to call it. But now, before we end the this episode of our show, I did want to give some talk to some exciting things. First, we are in the last throes of the show Star Trek Lower Decks. The final season of that show just started, and unfortunately, even though it just started, it's already almost over. I think there's only like one, maybe two episodes left, and then that's it. There has not been any talk of prolonging it, extending it beyond this fifth season. Nothing in the works on crossovers of the characters into Strange New Worlds, even though they've already done that once. There's nothing that says they're going to do it again, nor is there any mention of them appearing in any other Trek products at this time. So it looks like season five is going to be it. And I spent much of today getting caught up on this fifth season, and I have to say, I mean, it's wonderful. I think that the show is wonderful. It's funny. It's got a nice pacing to it. Right now, there's an overarching theme of all the episodes. So there's like this, or overarching plot, I should say, to every episode. So it's building to something in its conclusion, and so I'm really looking forward to that. You get to see a return of um, a lot of characters throughout this, like for example, um, Riker and Deanna Troy have been on a series of episodes. So if you want to know what they've been up to, go and watch Lower Decks. They're there. Data popped up in the most recent episode that I watched. T'Pol was in the most recent episode that I watched. Who else? Curzon Dax, of all people, an alternate universe Curzon Dax
oh, I was gonna say.
appears in an episode, as well as Garrick and Bashir and Harry Kim. Tom Paris has been in some episodes. Sephram Cochrane is in a couple of episodes. Like basically, it's such a great smattering of Trek characters that were, you know, either integral parts of shows or were like these weird one-offs that you never saw again, and they give great life to. It's just wonderful. Lily Sloan, who was in the movie Star Trek First Contact, again a one-off character who had a great you know, part in that movie, but we never see that character ever again until now in Lower Decks. And the beauty of all of it, with all of these characters, the original people are voicing their characters. So they're all there. It's not someone else playing them. So you want to hear Garrick, you want to hear Julian, they're there. To Paul, there. Harry, Tom, they're there. So I feel like the show is they do a really great job of getting these people to come back and voice these characters, and they all seem to be having a whole lot of fun. So go and watch it, and don't even worry about the fifth season being the ending season. Go and watch season one and work your way through. They're only 30-minute episodes. You'll be through the season before you know it, and I guarantee there'll be some great laughs along the way when you go and do it. So go and check that out.
All
Um,
right.
Now, turning our attention to the big Trek project that's underway, the Section 31 movie. Looks like that's going to come out next year. And I think that it's going to be exclusive to um, Paramount Plus. I don't see that it's going to be like a major movie release. It doesn't seem like they're doing it that way. It looks like it's going to be just direct to Paramount Plus, which I'm kind of surprised behind, considering they have Academy Award winner Michelle Yeoh as the character Philippa Georgiou in this movie. But it is what it is. You can check the trailer, which is now available everywhere. YouTube. I know that Facebook has released it a few times. You can go and watch it. It's it's definitely different. The movie has a very different vibe. The whole idea of Starfleet is kind of taking a back seat to other things that are going on. So I'm going to be interested, obviously, to watch it. It's a Trek product, so I'm gonna watch it. But
Right.
you should be looking for that one to fully officially drop. I think it's going to be early next year, like March or April. Same goes for the new season of Strange New Worlds. Think that's going to be coming out in April as well. And then really after those projects, after Lower Decks ends here in a couple of weeks, and then the movie Strange New Worlds will be the only Trek product that's out there. I know all other movies and stuff have pretty much stalled. There was a talk of doing a fourth Star Trek movie with that reboot cast, led by Chris Pine and Zachary Quinto and those guys. But as far as I know, that project has pretty much dried up. They're not doing it. And then the Starfleet Academy show, they keep talking about it. I know that they had finished principal casting, but there hasn't been any mention of a film schedule or expectation of a delivery of a first season or anything like that. So they may just be putting everything on hold until they get through this next round of Strange New Worlds, because this will be season three and it's already been greenlit for a season four. So uh, guess that's where they're going to stack all their eggs for now.
Huh.
So that's it. That's all the news on the Trek front. Again, go to Paramount Plus and check out all the stuff, and hopefully you can find something that you like. And we love to hear about it, whatever it is that you decide to watch or whatever. David, anything else?
That's it.
All right, guys. Well, that's going to do it for us on this episode of the Fire Caves. As always, you can find us and follow us anywhere you happen to do your various social medias, and you can listen to us anywhere you happen to listen to podcasts. I do it on Spotify. So until next time, guys, take care of yourselves.
Thanks, guys.